Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod with Lewis Schenk. He's into PR, podcast marketing, founder and director at Boost Media Agency, and another company previously called Travis and Co. Events. So cool guy altogether. He's in Australia. I'm in Mexico. We're gonna talk about podcasting and getting exclusive media and podcasting opportunities like this podcast today. Which is brought to you by podpar.com if you want to start or scale your own. Lewis, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, Charles, thank you so much for having me. I started Boost Media back in 2019. I sort of came out of a attempted career at playing professional golf. And so started my first company, Travis and Co. Events, which I still own 30% of that business. I sold it to one of my, good friends now, business partner. And so, yeah, we essentially built that together. And prior to that, I went to college in the United States. So, obviously from Australia, but managed to get myself a scholarship there to play golf. And it was a really great experience that kind of opened my eyes to possibilities. Australia is quite a small country in comparison. And that's kind of it. And so now what we do with Boost is we work with B2B well, I say B2B, most of our clients are in the B2B space. We help them get booked as a guest onto, existing and established podcasts. To obviously, expand their influence, reach, and authority. And then, we do a bunch in the media. So finding, great media opportunities for our clients to share their expert opinion. And then we just sort of focus on post-production in terms of, leveraging everything there to, post across every sort of social media channel to, further the reach of everything there. So that's the high level.
Really cool. And how's been the transition from golf to company owner?
Yeah, I always say this a lot. I was actually chatting to a lady last week, and I think had I not have at least tried to play golf at the highest level, I wouldn't be where I'm at in business today. Not to say that I'm so wildly far ahead, but I think it takes a lot of discipline, grit, and resilience to get through that first couple of years of business because, it can be rough. And especially when you don't know anything and you're just sort of figuring it out, it's a transferable skill from playing a sport to being in business, right? And it's just in sport, you want to outwork your competitors, right? Work smarter, work harder, figure out ways that you can, get better. And so I just sort of applied all of that same stuff, which, I can tell you for a fact, this has helped a lot. And especially during those times, it's more challenging, right? I remember probably the bitterest loss of my golfing career that I can remember was, I really wanted to win this tournament. It came down to the very last hole, very last shot on the very last day. And, the chips didn't fall in my favor. But then the next morning, 6 a.m., I was straight back to the driving range working on the shots that I, kind of missed on that day. Right. So it's just you get knocked off the horse, you just get straight back on and get back to work. There's no sitting there crying, feeling bad for yourself. I went to the gym that night just to get the anger out. I was furious. I'm just probably hit some PBs. And I just kind of like to apply that work ethic into everything that I do.
Right. And you then started an events company. That one you ran for 3 years before you decided to start Boost Media Agency. So tell us about these two businesses and what was it to start your first business there?
Yeah, so the events company, so how that sort of transpired is throughout this time I was playing golf, I obviously need to make a bit of money because it's not free, obviously. And so I was so fortunate in terms of getting the opportunity to firstly work for this company. So I saw a Facebook ad when I was sitting at home one day saying, hey, we need staff. And I was like, cool, I'm going to apply. It was a really great pay. And so then I applied, met the guy the next day. He hired me for the job on the weekend. And then about 2 months later, he was like, hey, me and my business partner are starting an e-commerce brand, right? We're not going to have time to run all this stuff. Do you want to sort of help us manage the day-to-day? And so they basically, handed the business off to me. So I was running everything from the lead gen, the sales, the marketing, which was honestly the best experience I could have ever got, right? Because I went to university to study a Bachelor of Entrepreneurship, right? And I knew nothing about the practicals of running a business. We did these fancy business plans like create an Uber, create an Airbnb, which it's quite intangible for most people. And most, to be frank, aren't going to build something like that. So anyway, I sort of learned everything about the business there. And then one day we had a conversation. I went into their office and, they said, oh yeah, we might consider selling the company one day. And I was like, okay, cool. And then that conversation, 40 minutes later, they basically said, okay, we want to sell this to you. Give us an answer by next week. And I was like, wow, that escalated quickly. And so anyway, my dad has had a company for about 20 years, knows a lot of people. And so he's like, hey, what are they asking for? And I told him the price and he's like, they're pretty much dreaming. He's like, look, I'll connect you with my friend. She just sold her business. She'll know a lot more than me. And so he connected me with her, and she kind of said, cool, get all these profit and loss, these balance sheets, everything from them. They had no documentation of anything, right? So long story short, I basically offered them about a tenth of what they wanted. They were furious. I didn't get paid for about 3 months after that. So I was just like, you know what? I know exactly how the business runs. It's going to cost me a lot less just to set up a website and, take the existing customers. And so, yeah, I started that sort of mid 2019. And then, yeah, it was going good until COVID hit. And then that was kind of where I hate the word pivot, but I changed business. And yeah, I'm glad it did happen, because the business I'm in now is a lot better vehicle in terms of, scalability and in terms of what I sort of value. Yeah, it was interesting.
Right. And how do you get your clients for that new business of yours, the Boost agency?
Yeah, so one of my good friends who I grew up with in Canberra, my hometown, he was in sales at the time and then started building sales teams and stuff like that. And so he literally was sort of like, I guess, coaching me. He was just like, bro, you need to just reach out to 100 people a day. So it started with Facebook. That was the first place I started. Then I sort of transferred to Instagram, and, it was going pretty good, to be honest. Like I shocked myself with how quickly it sort of moved. Um, and then it graduated to email. Like I started emailing people. So I'm like, I'm talking to these, coaches and stuff online, but I want to talk to like more sophisticated business owners. So I just started emailing them. It's actually funny, man, because, I know you've done a lot in the sort of cold email space, but like it was probably like a year and a half of me actually emailing people before I understood there was a whole world of cold email. I didn't realize it was like a thing. So yeah, it was initially all sort of outbound. And, I did that for about a year and a half, 2 years before we started doing any kind of advertising. So yeah, now it's a combination of both.
Right. Plus, you travel the world, you're into fitness. What does a day in your life look like nowadays?
Yeah, damn, life's pretty simple. So I wake up around 5:20 in the morning, random time. When I wake up at 5, I feel really tired, but when I wake up at 5:20, I actually feel okay, funnily enough. And so I go straight to my mat and do 10 minutes of breath work. Then I pretty much hit my desk and do some deep work for 2 hours. Then I probably take meetings from around 10 to 3 p.m. Then I'll head to the gym after that. And then some nights well, maybe once a week, I'll go to the driving range to hit some golf balls. And then other nights I'll just do a bit more work and, try and play golf once or twice a week, typically Friday afternoon or a Sunday. So yeah, my life is pretty much work, gym, and golf. That's it's what I like, and yeah, get to live it every day.
And you met Alex Hormozi not so long ago. Who do you learn from nowadays?
Yeah, so I went to acquisition.com in January. So it was the first ever workshop that they held there, which was amazing. I mean, in terms of who I learned from, I mean, it's quite varied. It depends if there's something specific that I'm trying to learn at a time. I do really love Alex and Layla Hormozi's content, just because they're really documenting stuff that not many people have actually done. There's a million people out there who probably preach similar things, but it just lands differently when it comes from people that are, have that kind of backing behind them. And just actually seeing how their team operate and all the people they've actually hired are incredibly smart and talented people. They're not just like randoms who've, been on an online consulting business. It's like people from Vanguard, people from these big organizations in America with a lot of experience. And so I really like their approach. They hired top down for that acquisition.com. They hired all the executives, and now they're just hiring all the doers. So yeah, mainly I would say Alex and Layla, a couple of Australians like Sabri Subi. He's a really prolific marketer. Yeah, those ones.
So Sabri Suri, or whatever his name is, I remember reading a book from his, was quite good. What lessons did you learn from him copywriting wise?
Yeah, so I mean, like his copy, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm an expert copywriter, right? Like I kind of look at what's working and model success. And so I think one of the things I've learned from him is like you really just have to be kind of wild, right? Like he's very out of left field when it comes to copywriting. Like I had an agency writing my copy, and like when I read through it, it was just very boring and like it didn't get me excited. So like I think with Sabri, it's like don't be afraid to actually like, not just make bold claims, but just be kind of wild with it, right? Like something that really interrupts someone's pattern, where it's like, this is like copy I've never seen before, right? Like the hook is obviously incredibly important. So I would say from that is, yeah, just go kind of wild with it.
How were you as a teenager, and how did you evolve in the fuller version of yourself?
Yeah, so I was very shy and introverted. Like the fact that I'm doing what I'm doing right now, my 14-year-old self would never have believed. I couldn't speak to someone without going red in the face. I was that sort of like, I would just get embarrassed for no reason, right? But anyway, it was like when I obviously kind of grew a lot as a person when, turned 18, but then it really sort of started when I was about 22. Picked up my first ever book besides, Harry Potter, which I read when I was in primary school. And then I sort of went down the personal development journey of like, understanding my mind, how it worked. Yeah, so I was around 22, 23, where I would say my life actually really changed onto the trajectory that it is now. And it all sort of started with a few books, like, the first one was Positivity by Barbara Fredrickson, of course, like the Think and Grow Rich, all the sort of classic books that people read, which start to like shift their paradigm. And like, I'm a big believer in all that stuff, but like the one thing I think people miss is that you actually have to do the work. Like, you can visualize and create things, but unless you actually go out there and make it happen, it doesn't just fall on your lap, unless you win the lottery or something.
For podcasts, how do you recommend getting yourself invited to other pods? What's your system for that?
In terms of for like myself or for our customers,
Yeah, or both.
yeah, I mean, it's pretty similar across the board, right? Obviously, we always look to find the places where our clients would be of most value, right? Everything's a value exchange. And like I talk about this all the time, like the media, they're very selfish, right? They just want things that's going to get clicks, get attention, or it's something new and exciting. So we always look to come up with some, talking points or angles with our clients that are, not just like, hey, here's how I scaled through 6 figures, right? It's just a boring vanilla subject that everyone's freaking talking about. It's funny, man. I actually shared with my team the pitch that you sent me because I was like, this is a really great example of like creativity, right? Quick bullet points with a really concise summary of like, interesting things about a person, because that's what really gets the interest. So we sort of apply that same sort of principle in terms of, yeah, what's the value that this person can add? What's the most unique and interesting things about them? And thinking outside the box, right? We have people in property. It's like, well, you did all this stuff in, the finance or XYZ world. What are some unique lessons from that? Then you kind of extract I guess, the juicy parts of people's story. Because I mean, for me, like people always wanted to talk to me about like my golf journey into business, right? That's what those people found interesting because it's different. So yeah, I would just say looking at it from a point of difference.
From a publication perspective, how do you get a bunch of views? For example, I'm doubling down on YouTube Shorts nowadays.
Mm-hmm. So you said from a publication perspective, like you mean
Getting
distribution?
views, getting traction, getting engagement.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not the world's foremost expert on going viral, right? Like, I mean, the way that I sort of look at things is like, I'm a firm believer if you don't have the brand, people will never buy from you, right? So like my vision and my mission with all sort of our clients and our content isn't to create virality or get the most views, which obviously 100% helps, right? Sometimes when you optimize for virality, you just get the wrong sort of people. It comes down to your own objectives, right? So we kind of look at like, what are the channels that we're marketing on? How can we build as much trust with people on there as possible? Because, let's say I send a LinkedIn DM, right? And I have no profile picture, no featured content. No one's even going to take the time. But if I have some professional content in a studio, I've got some great articles, all this stuff, like, you can kind of create that thing that, I don't have an exact metric, but you do a lot of outbound as well. If you have that profile, that presence, you're going to open a lot more doors than someone who doesn't have that, right? So our kind of focus isn't necessarily like virality. It's more so building thought leadership for people who have expertise and then, helping them sort of get that in front of those people consistently.
I'm reading your tweets and I'm wondering, what are your findings nowadays when it comes to entrepreneurs? What are they lacking? What are they missing? What are their top problems?
When you say entrepreneurs, are we talking about like, I guess people are like, let's just say like a similar level to like myself, or like we talking about like, the Hormozis or stuff like that? Like maybe just so I can give like a really accurate answer.
Yeah, anyone that has a business, anyone that founded a business and that's running their own things full time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say kind of back to what I said before of like, everyone really focuses on like, oh, let's just get the customers and all this stuff. But like, if you don't have some kind of brand, people won't buy, right? And I think one mistake people make, especially on Twitter, like I haven't been on Twitter in a while, as you can probably tell from my posts. Twitter is just a place where it just seems like a dick swinging contest, right? All these guys are like trying to one up each other with like, oh, I signed this client, or like, oh, I just bought this Rolex, or like, yeah, I understand it. But at the same time, I think if I was a customer of them and I went and like looked at their Twitter, I'd be like, why are they flexing this? It just seems a little, it'll be a bit of a red flag, right? So I think being humble, I'm not gonna say it's a superpower, but like too many people get very egotistical when it comes to business. And I think Hormozy talks about it really well, is like, people would rather buy the watch and buy the car to impress people and make themselves broke versus actually like building a business on fundamentals versus some tactics and flexing a Rolex to think that people are going to be impressed. So yeah, I mean, to summarize that into two parts, I would say one, like firstly, having a really strong sort of brand and online presence. And then secondly, yeah, just, you know, get good results, but be humble. Like, don't go out there and think you have to impress all your buddies. Like, tell your friends, but doesn't necessarily have to be publicized to the world.
What are your top goals for this year?
We'll have a few. I mean, definitely stretch goals. First goal is 10 million in revenue. Second is to have 100,000 followers, personal brand. And then the third is, it's kind of a vague goal, but just be the highest version of myself. So sort of act like, if I'm in a situation where, I have a pattern where in this situation I react or, maybe get angry, just think through what would the highest version of myself do? And then sort of do that. So I have those written down on my wall on my phone. So it's just like a constant reminder. I used to set like 10, 15, 20 goals, but you just get confused with it, right? Like it's just keep it simple, focus on that because there's obviously, targets and objectives within that. Yeah.
Some travel this year. What kind of value do you get from traveling and changing environment?
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is you don't see the full picture when you're inside the frame. And so travel always gives me a fresh perspective of, especially when you go to, I guess, inspiring places. Like, when I went to Vegas, I was like blown away with, the grandiose of it. And it's just like, wow, like, to be, yeah, I think you really kind of see new perspectives and everything. And you almost get, reinvigorated, like, wow, I can't wait to go back and work on this and have that time to actually step out. So I find, some people think travel is a waste of time. I know Hormozy is like, holidays are for, people who blah, blah, blah. But I think, you got to find what works for you. And when I go traveling, I get a fresh perspective. I come back inspired. And yeah, that's kind of why I love it.
Why do you like the Nelk Boys and the Full Send podcast?
How do you know that?
The
You do
stalker.
your research. Yeah, I mean, I watched Nelk probably from like 2015. And honestly, like, I think everyone loves to have a good laugh. And those guys, honestly, they made me laugh more than anything. Because you can tell when someone's pranks are fake, but their stuff was just so hilarious that like every night before bed, I would just, it was my like one part of the day. Like when I was playing golf and, trying to pursue it, I'm up at 5 a.m. I'm hitting the gym for an hour and a half. I'm at the golf course for, 12 hours. Coming home, I get in the bed, pull up my iPad and put on the Nelk Boys, and I just go to sleep laughing. And, it was a really fun way for me at the end of the day. So firstly, I respect them as content creators. And secondly, as business people, they've built, a huge brand and business off of that. And they've actually been very smart in terms of like getting very, seasoned business people to help them run that business aspect. So yeah, I mean, I like the fact that they create funny content. Everyone loves to laugh. And secondly, I like what they've built.
What did you learn from interviewing Billy McFarland?
Well, I mean, besides the obvious, don't do anything illegal. I mean, what's the one thing I learned? I do believe after speaking with him that he's actually like a really good guy, right? I think I watched the Fire Festival documentary after interviewing him again, and like, I hadn't watched it since maybe like 2017 or like right when it came out. And being an entrepreneur myself, he was really like, from what I saw, he was just trying to make it work, right? He was just like, let's get everyone here. We know we can create them a good time, right? He just had every bad thing that could have possibly happen. And that resulted in pretty much the worst case outcome, right? Obviously, I don't think anyone died, which probably would have been worse. But I truly believe that he had good intentions with it. Things just didn't line up. And he, it's like that classic thing. It's like, what's the saying? Just get started and figure the rest out later. He was just applying that. So yeah, I mean, can't say there was any crazy business lessons that I learned, but it was more so, I think he had good intent.
What are your financial goals? You seem to like Dubai luxury cars. Will there be a point at which there will be enough?
It's a good question. I mean, it really depends, man, because so many things change, right? Like $10 million net worth, 10, 20 years ago would have been like very, very substantial. Whereas like nowadays with inflation, all this stuff, like to buy a house and then you have to pay the land tax every year, like you actually need significant amounts of money. So I guess my first major financial milestone is to have, a $10 million net worth. And then once I get there, it's like, okay, we'll reassess. I don't necessarily, everyone has different opinions on like, yeah, you have to, know exactly the end goal. I think it's like, cool, let's hit this milestone, then let's reassess. Because I might get to that and be like, you know what? Based on my calculations and how I'm feeling right now, I could be fine for the next 20 years and, whatever. Or I might be like, you know what? Let's just keep going bigger. So I don't have an exact answer because I know there's that constant and never ending, chase of more and more. But yeah, I've got that initial goal. And then once I can hit that, we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Lewis, for today. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, I mean, probably the best place, LinkedIn or Instagram. Lewis Schenk. It's the same across every platform. So yeah,